This is a podcast to celebrate 10 years of no charging for home care for disabled people in the London borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. And it's a story that we, Hammersmith and Fulham Coalition Against Cuts, wants to talk about. We're also known as HAFCAC as an acronym, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit as the three surviving members of the HAFCAC steering group about how we got ourselves together and why, and 10 years down the line, why no charging for home care is still a fundamental campaign for disabled people everywhere in the UK. Kevin was the chair of HAFCAC at our most active. Does that sound about right?
I think so.
Yeah. So maybe as the chair, Kevin, you can get started.
When do you get your council posts? I can't remember.
Oh, not until 2018.
16?
Oh, 16 for you, because you started.
Yeah.
You joined.
Yeah,
when we got the Disabled People's
I
Commission.
think that definitely means that Kevin was the chair during our active.
But by the time you stepped down as chair and I became chair, the victory of the campaign, i.e. the ending of charging in Hammersmith and Fulham, we'd achieved that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my time as chair was pretty easy, I think. So I was just a steering group member when we got started back in 2009. No, 2009?
When we got going.
Yeah, when we got going. It was before then, wasn't it?
2007.
Yeah, 2007, okay. So 18 years ago.
Yeah, so.
It's a long time.
It is a long time.
It is a really long time. And I think when we were in the middle of it, I just remember it being quite tough. And so now we've had no charging in the borough for 10 years. It all sounds fluffy and wonderful and lovely, but actually for us achieving that was a long process of campaigning where we had to just be really consistent and keep the messages clear that charging disabled people for essential support just to live in the community with non-disabled people. The messages about the discrimination of charging in terms of the council, local authorities, and not charging other residents for using like waste collection and sending their kids to school. And so you're not charged for using those services on the amount of that you use those services. So for a disabled person with a lot of support needs, the more support needs you have, which is an indication of the likelihood of how much you're likely to be excluded in society in general. At the same time, you're being charged more because you're needing that more support.
I think that's right. And I think the thing that really got us started was a shared horror, really, that the council thought that it would be perfectly acceptable. In fact, something that the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham would be very supportive of would be to start charging disabled people who need support for that support. And I think that's what kept the campaign going with such passion and positivity, because we were all united in our horror at the thought of that, at the prospect of that, and all recognised it as discrimination. And I think that was what was really important. I think also we were really clear, weren't we? And I think still really clear that what was important about the campaign group was to keep it focused on disabled people, led by disabled people, and entirely independent, to enable us to be able to say what we wanted to who needed to hear it at whatever time that we thought was appropriate. So we didn't seek out this campaign to be led by the local organisation run and controlled by disabled people, because we recognised that they had local authority funding and therefore might be restricted in what they were able to say in terms of challenging the local authority. And I thought that was probably one of our big strengths, that we were separate from the system, but entirely representative of disabled people in the borough. What do you think, David?
I think that's right. The fact that we acquired our own funding, that we weren't dependent on anybody in the council or anything like that for money, that we can say what we felt we had to say and even get thrown out of council meetings.
That's right. Yeah, without any concern for our funding, because at that time, our only way of funding our activities was the notorious, infamous pub quizzes that you ran, David, at the Gold Hawk, where we almost had to run a waiting list for people to attend. But I think you say in the film, don't you, Kevin, that what was really important about those, although we all had a great time and we made money from it for much needed campaigning resources. The thing that was most important about those was the conversations that we could have together with residents who didn't think it was their issue, but also councillors that came along and people that just turned up because they liked to quiz. Just an opportunity to talk about why this was an important issue.
Yeah, I'm having a long conversation with Stephen Cowan about various whiskies. that's the most I remember talking to Stephen Cowan was about whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, and just going back to the funding, I think the fact that we didn't have any, because we were all, me, you, David and Debbie, and very sadly, Debbie died in 2018, and she was a stalwart of what we were able to achieve together. And so the four of us were pretty fearless anyway. I think we are pretty fearless as individual disabled people, but really having no funding from the public sector or another kind of charitable organisation really meant that we were untouchable.
And I was going to say that apart from pub quizzes, we did get a little bit of funding from local unions. Yeah, I went off to I can't remember if it was still now going those days, or whether it converted to Unison, but attending one of their meetings and coming back with a promise of £100, I think.
Yeah, it's probably timely, isn't it, to talk about Debbie Dom, local disabled resident, lived round the corner from me in Fulham. And I think it's a testament to how influential she was as one of the founding members of HAFCAC, that Steve Cowan, leader of the council, still talks about those conversations he had with Debbie right at the beginning of this campaign and how those conversations really made him very aware.
Didn't she used to invite him round for tea?
She absolutely did.
And bent his ear. So.
Yeah. He still tells the story at every opportunity that those conversations is what convinced him that charging disabled people was double discrimination, and that under his Labour administration, it was his responsibility to put a stop to that. And that to me is a testament to how powerful she was as a disability rights activist. And I think we all still miss her, and her energy around the work that HAFCAC did. And I think whenever we get together to talk about how on earth we managed to pull this off, Debbie always comes up in that conversation.
As very, if not instrumental, very influential anyway.
But I think it's the combination of all the people that were involved in the campaign that made it successful. And I think what we managed to do was keep the profile of the issue really alive, because it's really easy when you're campaigning to just get worn out and drop off the intensity of the campaign. And I think we did that. It wasn't like every day and every week, but it was just consistent over about 8 or 9 years. And I think to keep that going was, now looking back, because when you're in it and you don't quite grasp what you're doing in terms of, I remember in 2000 and I don't know what it was, maybe 9, when finally the council managed to implement charging, feeling extremely depressed, and that we were that's after 2 high court cases that we lost. And we talk about those high court cases are talked about in our film, which is going to be released in October 2025, which is called actually £12.40 an hour for a shower, which refers to the cost that the local authority in 2006 was charging per hour for support to a disabled person. And I think that's just that £12.40 an hour for a shower highlights the demeaning fact that people have to pay that amount of money. And as we know, having a shower for a disabled person can take longer than an hour.
Yeah.
So that's why the film's called £12.40 an hour for a shower. And it is the story of disabled people's struggle to abolish home care charging in Hammersmith and Fulham. And as you said, Tara, I think it is 10 years. And for a lot of that time, we've been the only local authority in England that has had implemented a policy of non-charging. And that's because of our campaigning that we were able to bring that issue alive to the leader of the council in opposition at that time, Stephen Cowan, who is now the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, in a way that we made it really real.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I remember holding, well, each of us at some point holding, when we were at a demonstration, usually outside Hammersmith and Fulham Town Hall on King Street, or outside Charing Cross Hospital, or parading around North End Road, wherever it was. Across those 8-9 years, we were out demonstrating on the streets, holding up banners, saying with all sorts of really fantastic slogans. And I think the £12.40 an hour for a shower resonated for a lot of people, not just disabled residents, but people. I remember we were outside the town hall when I think the London Conservative Party were having a conference and Boris Johnson was turning up long before he became Prime Minister. And I remember we were a very small handful of people to begin with, but then we were joined by a group of local residents who were part of a housing campaign. And then a group of students came along. And before I knew it, we were probably close to 100 people who all came along to find out first what was going on and then to hear from us why we were campaigning. And the shock from them, really, that something so fundamental in terms of our human rights as residents of Hammersmith and Fulham, someone had calculated the cost of what it would be to support someone to have a shower for an hour. I think people just couldn't get their heads around about the demeaning nature of the process that someone who needs support had to go through at the time to determine how much they would have to spend to get the support they need to live at home with choice and control. And I think there was something very powerful in being out on the streets a lot, because it was a great way of engaging sort of the general public in our campaign. And I think that was really powerful, because this is so much bigger than just disabled people. We might be at the sharp end, but I think one of our big successes was winning over lots of other residents who saw also that it was discriminatory to continue with that kind of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I think when we were in North End Road, and I remember talking to somebody in the street, because it was just in the run-up to the local elections, and somebody clearly saying to me, actually, I wasn't going to vote at all. But now that I am talking to you, I can see there are differences between different parties' positions on support and services for disabled people. And I'm now going to vote tomorrow. And so I think it does have a real impact if, in this case, disabled people can really talk about our lives and the impact of political decisions on our lives, because so much of our lives is hidden by the dross that comes out in the media that doesn't address really the fundamental things that are important to us. And as people will know, disabled people are usually not decision makers, so not in positions of power generally, and we have a very low number of disabled people who are MPs, who are politicians, who are policymakers. And I think if the decision-making processes don't significantly change, then disabled people are always going to be at the wrong end of decision-making.
I think that's right, Kevin. I think it has been really timely that we've pulled together this film in celebration of the 10-year anniversary of no charging in Hammersmith and Fulham. But I think it's timely for other reasons too, picking up what you've just said. I think 18 years ago, which feels like a very long time ago, I remember then thinking, can things get any worse for disabled people? Because things felt bad and have continued to feel bad and worse, 14 years of austerity notwithstanding. But I think in 2025, we have a relatively new government in post, just over 12 months. And I feel that things have taken a further downturn in terms of the narrative about who we are as human beings in this country. And I think that, leaving the 10 years anniversary aside, I think there's something really important about us speaking up now and reminding people of how important not being discriminated against in terms of the support we need at home, how key that is to our inclusion and equity in society, given that we are facing some outrageous cuts to welfare support in this country the likes that I don't remember seeing. And it's horrifying to me that it's an administration that has talked for many, many years about how it supports disabled people's inclusion. And so, yes, I think it's an opportunity 10 years down the line, or for us as steering group members, 18 years down the line, to talk about the threats that are coming our way now and how important it is to protect some of the victories that we have secured here in Hammersmith and Fulham, because it's not just the no charging for support to live at home, but it's also the commitment that we have had in Hammersmith and Fulham now for nearly 8 years to nothing about disabled people without disabled people. This idea of working with disabled people in co-production around policy decision-making, around service design and delivery. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect. There are lots of things that we would do differently. But I think at a time when there are attacks coming at disabled people from every direction, it's important to highlight the successes that we have made here, the achievements that we have won as disabled people, to really, I'm careful about using the word inspire, but to encourage maybe, to remind other disabled people that change is possible, but it's change that happens as a result of self-organisation and collaborative working. Nothing else gets us there, I don't think. What do you think, David?
I must admit, I'm a bit disappointed that our success didn't engender success elsewhere.
Yeah.
It sort of stopped at Hammersmith and Fulham, didn't it?
I think that's the important thing about the film. It's actually because people have asked us individually or together over the last 10 years how you did it, why you did it, how have you kept it going, how have you kept the momentum going. And I think when we've been in it, I think we just haven't had the time, and maybe we need a little bit of space to reflect like we're doing today. So I'm hoping that the film will get the message out and really encourage particularly disabled people's organisations, but policymakers and politicians to really dig down deep and look at this issue with forensic eyes in terms of budgets and look at ways of getting rid of charging. I think it's important for us to say that our position from the beginning, if the policy is bad for disabled people, then we're opposed to it. So that it doesn't matter who the decision maker is in terms of who's in charge of the government or who's running a particular local authority. Because as people might not know, Hammersmith and Fulham has changed hands between Conservative Party and the Labour Party. It's changed hands. So we've not always had one party running the council. So it's a challenge, I think, for disabled people in some councils where there's an endless re-election of the same kind of flavour of administration when there's no significant change for disabled people. And if you're re-elected time and time again and you're not doing anything for disabled people, why would you? Because you've been getting away with it for a long, long time. I think it's also just worth explaining that in 2006, Hammersmith and Fulham Council didn't charge disabled people for independent living support. We call it independent living support because it's about promoting people's right to independent living and to have choice and control in our lives in terms of how we live them and the support that we need to do that. So we were in a local authority that didn't charge. And at that time in 2006, both parties, but the Conservative Party that was elected in 2006 had a clear commitment in their manifesto to continue not charging. And actually, within 3 months of being elected in May 2006, I think in September 2006, they started a consultation process to introduce charging. And I think that was the rupture point where we said enough is enough and we're not going to accept that. And in fact, part of our court case was that we had a legitimate expectation. That's a kind of legal term, but was part of our case that we had a legitimate expectation as residents that the council was not going to implement charging disabled people because it was in black and white in their manifesto not to do that. And then, as I think as Tara said earlier, the background was the implementation of austerity from 2010, which had a real impact on Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So we had a 6.56% cut in central government funding in 2010. And just looking back at my notes, on February the 23rd, 2011, the council approved the budget announcing a massive £27 million worth of cuts in 2011 to 2012, and 6 million was destined to come from the community care, social care budget. And this was coupled with an intention to make £64.2 million worth of cuts by 2013, 2014. Yet the Prime Minister, David Cameron, his New Year's message was, we're all in this together. And yet clearly that's not true. Disabled people, both nationally and locally, were being disproportionately targeted for cuts. And that kind of, unfortunately, we see that continuation in 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think going back to the point you raised, David, about turning up at the council meeting, I remember HAFCAC and our supporters and allies turning up at the council meeting where they were deciding on those budget cuts that you just referred to, Kevin. And I think the thing that started me shouting was watching the cabinet at the time that was Conservative-led, playing Sudoku, someone knitting, essentially really not taking it seriously at all.
Couldn't care less.
Complete lack of regard for the damage that they were about to unleash across the whole of the borough, because charging, whilst is directly discriminatory against disabled residents, the impact is much broader on our families and friends, the people that we have close to us in the community. And I just remember thinking, this is what is an absolute disgrace, and this just needs calling out. And then really mayhem erupted, if I remember rightly. We all started heckling, shouting what an absolute disgrace it was. I think what was great for HAFCAC is that the local, and I think there was one national media in the room, I was carried out on the shoulder of a security guard, but it really then woke the media up to our campaign. And I remember afterwards, they were clambering over us, wanting to understand why we were so incensed. Why wouldn't you be incensed? Seeing your local politicians making outrageous cuts and damaging people's lives to such an extent, but thinking playing games and knitting whilst making those decisions was perfectly acceptable. And I think it's that and other things really helped us to be much more visible as a campaign and to generate much more media attention around what it was we were doing and why we were doing it. And we know that the legal case didn't go the way that we wanted, but I remember, Kevin, you always say that losing, but then winning the right to appeal, what that did for disabled residents of Hammersmith and Fulham was delay the fact that charging could be introduced, which I know sounds like we're dancing on the head of a pin, but actually that bought us time to continue to say wherever we could what was happening in Hammersmith and Fulham and why it was wrong. And I think engaging the Public Law Project, and in particular Ravi Lobir, who was the legal guy who supported our case, there were a number of key points in our campaign. But for me, that was one of the key ones in terms of bringing or pulling in some national attention. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely it was. I think it also really raised our profile. And I think what's a delicious moment for me is being in that courtroom. So the High Court in London is very old, and the courtroom, whilst we could get in, so usually you have the claimants, that was us, and that was 3 disabled people. That was Debbie Dom, and Moses and Dulcie. And those were the 3 disabled residents that took the legal action. And so I remember going to court, and obviously the council were on the other side. And because the court was inaccessible, everybody had to sit on the same side because we're usually on opposing sides of the court. So we were sat behind the council officers, and the council's legal team.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think they were shocked that actually 3 disabled residents, that they were forced to go to the High Court to explain what they were doing and how they'd done it and the process that they... So that was kind of, when you don't have a lot of power, there were delicious moments where they're just kind of gold dust moments. But the fact that the court was inaccessible on one side also kind of said it all in terms of really how disabled people are also excluded really from the justice system. So I just have to say, council officers were squirming in their seats, particularly because we were sitting next to them or behind them. And barristers often kind of refer to the officers or people behind them in the middle of a case as things develop. So we could hear all of the questions going backwards and forwards. And even though, we lost the case in the end, it was a delicious moment. But
the professor guy in the film yesterday, he said that though we lost the case, the judges did make one or two sort of critical points, which must have aided our case.
I think Ravi talks about it, doesn't he?
Was it Ravi?
Our fantastic legal person. Firstly, he talks about Moses, Dulcie and Debbie as having amazing courage, taking and meaning it genuinely, taking a case against the authority, providing them with that support. But he also, I think he remembers the judge saying that Hammersmith and Fulham Council were sacrificing home care on the altar of austerity or cuts, which I think sums it up beautifully, i.e., penalising disabled people who need support.
Actually, I mean, it's important to remember that when the Conservative Party came in 2006 and they were in power till 2014, we were the only local authority in England to cut the council tax 3%. So cutting it 3% every year for 8 years, and at the same time saying that there wasn't any money to support disabled people and to implement the policy of not charging. So I think what that said to all of us, and this Hammersmith and Fulham Council at that time was David Cameron's flagship Conservative council, because it was the only council in England cutting council tax 3%. So when you look at 8 years, that's 3 times 8, that's 24. I mean, that's a huge loss of income to provide support.
Willingly given up so they could give disabled people more burden.
Yeah, I think that's right. And doesn't Steve Cowan in the film make that really good point that ending home care charging is a political choice that for him and his administration was essential. It was almost a non-negotiable. And he says that's down to disabled people and the conversations he had and continues to have with disabled people about the negative impact of charging and how much more we can be included and feel equal when the playing field is leveled to some degree. Not entirely, I accept, but to some degree, absolutely.
I think it struck me during COVID, which was a particularly awful time for all of us, but it was a particularly awful time because of the impact on disabled people in terms of accessing support. And we know that, for example, the number of do not resuscitate notice put on disabled people during COVID was extreme. And in terms of, we were the highest number of people that died during COVID, that's disabled people. And
I hadn't heard that.
6 times more likely.
Even more than elderly.
Absolutely. Well, I imagine a lot of the older people who were disabled people would be included in that stat. But it doesn't surprise us when you talk about the sudden increase in DNR notices.
But in relation to charging, and at that time I was working for Hammersmith and Fulham Council, but I strongly got the sense that the council's social workers and support staff were not having to go out and do financial assessments around people's support and around their assessments under the Care Act. So Hammersmith and Fulham Council social workers were able to go out and support people. Because, to be honest, most disabled people, you want to have as little to do as possible with local statutory services and social workers, because coming with that is a financial assessment and criteria. And it's difficult when, on the one hand, you're a social worker aiming to support a disabled person, and at the same time, you're taking money and income away. So I thought what was really interesting was that because we didn't charge, it was clear that Hammersmith and Fulham staff were going out to try and offer support, and it wasn't tainted by the fact that there was a hidden financial assessment form in their bag.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And if I remember rightly too, the Director of Adult Social Services at the time, Lisa Redfern, wrote out to everyone in receipt of independent living support, reaffirming the council's commitment to the support they were receiving and really doing what they could to make sure everyone had the PPE that they needed. But I think sort of rolling right forward to current times, I think in Hammersmith and Fulham, we know the system isn't perfect. We do. None of us here in HAFCAC know that things here are perfect. But there is a principle that underlines the support that people receive here, which is that you will not be charged for it. And what we know anecdotally across the country is that disabled people are facing outrageous financial assessments where they are having to make crazy decisions about what they can afford in terms of the support they're able to receive. And I remember Professor Luke Clements in the film makes this really important point about, in some cases, people are living really very unsafe lives because they can't afford the support they need to be able to feel safe.
Yes.
And this is in a country that is, what, 5th or 6th richest in the world. To me, that's an absolute human rights disgrace. It really is.
I remember, did you say his name was Luke Clements?
Yeah.
I remember him making that point in the film.
And I think his voice is very helpful in the film because I think, and which is what we've tried to sort of use the film really to tell the HAFCAC story of the campaigning success, but also we hope, and it, like I said before, an encouragement to other local authorities, but probably more disabled people's own organisations to say it's possible. It really is possible to shift the narrative around the discriminatory practice of home care support, independent living support, as we like to call it. And I think we also think there is much that people can learn from how we achieve that success here in Hammersmith and Fulham, particularly with regard to the Social Care Commission, whose work is underway at the moment under Baroness Casey. We think it's really important that commission watch this film, speak to people in Hammersmith and Fulham about how things have been achieved here and how we have kept that commitment going now for 10 years.
There's been so many commissions on social care.
Absolutely.
Going back, what's the Andrew?
Oh, Dilnot.
Yeah. He was about 10, 12 years ago, wasn't he?
But I don't think, unless Kevin might prove me right, I don't think any of those commissions have ever considered as an option no charging. I think I'm really tired of this idea that somehow we can create a fair charging system. There's no such thing as a fair charging system. Charging is discriminatory.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah, my view's always been that I don't mind paying taxes for schools, even though I don't have kids. I don't mind paying taxes for parks, even though I almost never go into a park, because they're essential services people need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we want to live in a well-run local society, local environment that everyone can benefit from. And I agree in terms of, I kind of started working when I was 13 and then like Saturday jobs. And so I've always, and except for years that I couldn't work, I've always been of the mindset of you and David that we put into the pot what we can and
take out what we need.
And take out what we need, and we all share commitment. But obviously that is not the position.
Trouble is, in this country, any party that says we're going to put up tax just won't get in.
Well,
even though every poll suggests that the happiest countries in the world are usually Scandinavian and they have a very high tax rate but provide brilliant services.
I think we're long overdue a grown-up conversation around tax and what tax can pay for, and taxing possibly wealth that people haven't earned, that people have inherited. I just think it's generally successive governments have seen disabled people and our community, and we make up 1/5 of the population of this country, that somehow we are a soft target for whether it's increased taxation through charging for essential services that we require to live at home with choice and control, or to cut the income support we need that is essentially there to remove the barriers that we experience as disabled people. But it's not Labour or Conservative. This is successive governments
Yeah,
that have seen
exactly.
us as a soft target.
Yep.
I think going back to what you and David were saying about the kind of regularity of commissions, also the very in-your-face thing about those commissions is they're nothing about disabled people without disabled people, because there's never any disabled people, often not even one person on leading those commissions. And given that we are the beneficiaries, inverted commas, of those decisions, how can it be right that decisions are being made by commissions run by non-disabled people all the time, coming up with piecemeal solutions and basically fragmented kind of information gathering that is not really being led by disabled and older people? In my view, you're never going to get really good outcomes from any of those commissions if that very power structure doesn't change. And, we should be leading those commissions, and then we should be coming up with the recommendations, and then the political fight starts in terms of arguing about how the best way to implement that is. But I think unless that changes, I think we're all tired. I'm 62, we're getting older, we've been around the houses, and we're fed up of it.
I think you're so right, Kevin. And it kind of brings us round, because I think the concept of co-production, which we've highlighted before, I think came out of the work that HAFCAC had done in the lead up to the ending of home care charging in Hammersmith and Fulham, because we always talked, didn't we, as a campaign and as a steering group, about nothing about disabled people without disabled people. And when I think the council, under Steve Cowan's leadership, recruited a Disabled People's Commission, to me, when I agreed to chair that, it was clear to me what needed to happen. We'd already achieved the victory of ending of home care charging. The next victory really was about securing that sense of, or that principle around nothing about disabled people without disabled people, i.e. that no decisions, and you've made the point better than me, Kevin, it is that decisions about our lives need to include us as part of those conversations and ultimately the decision making. And I think it's interesting that in 2025 we have a government, a national government, who is now using the word co-production when it talks about how it wants to reshape the benefits system. I've yet to be convinced that they have any idea what that means at all, given they've already started to make decisions around what a revised and significantly reduced welfare system looks like. So that can't be co-produced at this stage. I know they are seeking to recruit an independent disability advisory panel, but how can that group work in co-production if there are some decisions that have already been taken around PIP, around universal credit, etc., etc.? I'm going to remain hopeful that there is some potential for change around here. But honestly, like both of you, we've been around the houses for quite some time now, and it's easy to be cynical around what the reality of the current national government's actual practical implementation of co-production will really look like. It's easy to use that language, much more difficult to actually do it. And we know that, don't we, locally? We know that it's tough because you're challenging the fundamentals of how people have traditionally worked with residents. And there will be some resistance to that, of course, because this is about suddenly expect people to shift what they think about in terms of power and shifting towards something that feels much more about power sharing.
Yeah, that is really important to say those things as well. And, meaningful co-production starts with trust and transparency. And I think I remember when we started working around making better decisions together, co-production, the amount of distrust from local residents was absolutely huge. And why wouldn't it be anything else? But I think what's important about non-charging and the process was that it's a form of co-production for me, and it's not kind of maybe how everyone perceives co-production. But I think that kind of model of disabled people campaigning against a particular barrier, in this case charging, local politicians, because this was a political campaign, because if we don't change the minds of politicians, we can't change the discrimination and the impact. So it's clearly a political campaign. So we had to influence politicians. Then we did that, and they made the decision ultimately to not charge and implemented it. And then council officers were tasked with the practicalities of implementing it. So for me, that was a really strong form of co-production, even though
Absolutely.
we were not always in the same room. I would say on the good side, it didn't involve lots of huge round and round robin meetings going nowhere and endless papers and bureaucracy that doesn't go anywhere. That it was kind of, in some senses, very clear and crisp. But that came really from disabled people leading the way. And then I think that gave us the foundations. So we have some trust and transparency proof. So then, as disabled people, we're willing to give it a go and to go out and build on that. And that's why the Disabled People's Commission came out of that. And then the work of various groups around the borough to work in co-production on things like redesigning a new inclusive town hall and developing a disabled people's housing strategy, an independent living strategy. So what I still say is co-production from the charging campaign. We wouldn't have had any trust or transparency to go on and do what we've done since. And what's lacking with this government and its use of the word co-production is that there's no trust and there's no transparency.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Have we got any other memories of things that stand up? I mean, we have to pay tribute to the posters and the T-shirts that were part of our campaign. And another delicious moment was the poster that had the council leader at the time in 2006.
Is that the lovely Stephen Greenhouse?
It certainly was.
Is that who you're referring to?
Standing at the bottom of an escalator with a kind of like a...
Yeah, I was trying to remember that.
Yeah, the wording.
It was a campaign poster. We reused an image that they'd used to promote themselves and turned it into one that was kind of like anti-disabled people, if I remember right.
And also, because that slogan as a local authority was putting residents first.
That's right.
So we coupled that with putting disabled residents last.
We did.
Yeah, and it had on it local services gone missing.
No charging zone.
Council leader seen in the vicinity.
That's right. That's right.
And then the T-shirts, which are memorabilia, which you still...
Legendary. And you'll see from the photo on this podcast, David and I wearing probably our favourite T-shirt. I think, a stand-up moment for me. I always enjoyed the getting out into the street activities. And I remember after we'd won that just groundbreaking achievement of ending home care charging, we sort of shifted, what are we going to do next? Well, we'd realised one of the successes was getting, and you talked about this, Kevin, getting disabled residents to sign up to vote. So we created...
North End Road, I remember that.
That's right. But don't you remember we hired a wheelchair accessible bus? We managed, after with that huge success, we decided to get a little bit of money from Trust for London to build up our campaigning resources. And we used some of that money to hire a wheelchair accessible bus to drive around the borough.
I do remember that, yeah.
And I remember me and John Woods from Safety Net People First, which is the local group led and controlled by people with learning difficulties, with megaphones leaning out of the window shouting that disabled people sign up and have your voices heard now, and sort of moving around the borough. I think we stopped at 3 different places and we had all the forms that disabled people need to register to vote, and we supported people to get registered to vote. And I mean, it's great fun. Yeah, great fun. But hugely, I think, powerful in terms of just stopping random people in the street checking that they were registered to vote, but reminding them, particularly disabled residents, how important it is to have your voice heard at the ballot box.
I can remember in North End Road, people coming up to me and saying, which way should I vote? I said, well, I'm not allowed to tell you. But,
that's right.
But these are the things to think about.
But these are the responses. You remember, I can't remember which local election it was, and we'd written a letter to each of the parties, putting forward candidates, asking them a series of questions around their policy positions in relation to disabled people. And we printed that off and were able to hand that out to people to say, this is what's useful for you to know in terms of what the political parties are saying about policies that relate to us, bearing in mind there can't be that many policies that don't relate to us.
No.
You know, we're
Yeah.
citizens of
Yeah.
this country.
Yeah, I mean, you can't blame people in the way that things are presented, but actually disabled people, we want a piece of the pie in relation to everything that local authorities deliver and national governments deliver because, well, we're citizens of this country.
Yeah.
And we use or we're part of delivering or we're part of creating everything, whether it's housing or transport or inclusive design and buildings and public spaces. All of that belongs to us too.
Yeah.
And the big moment for me was, I don't remember now quite what year it was, but it was the Conservative Council's AGM. And we had produced a petition against implementing charging and we had 400 signatures. And then we were in the council chamber. It was quite packed and there was quite a lot of us. But we had this bloody petition, which we didn't really know what we were going to do with. And obviously, it's the council's annual general meeting, so the kind of agenda is fixed and you can't usually disturb that. So I just remember Steve Cowan, who was the leader of the opposition at that time, he just physically took the petition out of somebody's hand and then flew across. I got this vision of him actually leaving the ground and heading towards the council leader's desk. And then he slammed it down on the table. It was really loud, I remember. And I thought it was a stroke of political genius in terms of that meeting could have gone completely to order. And absurdly, Stephen Greenhouse started to defend the council's position on implementing charging instead of just saying, it's our AGM, this isn't on the agenda. We know you've got a petition, we'll get back to you. All hell broke loose in terms of a debate around charging and people shouting. And I always remember that moment as another delicious moment. But I also remember that was the point where I thought, actually, this guy is a politician. And generally, disabled people, we don't have much truck with them. But he's literally willing to put himself on the line on this issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And that's why the relationships between disabled people and particularly the leader of the council has endured. And I think when I hear him speak on charging, he doesn't need a script from a council officer.
Agreed.
And the passion and the support and the really grasping the issue is really, I really feel it.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest that is very rare in my lifetime in terms of getting that from seeing that in a politician.
I think you're so right, Kevin. It's because it's not just he's a really smart politician, but what I've always said, and it's important that he hears it often, is what an ally he has been to HAFCAC and to disabled people in the borough, and I think continues to be. And I think that's where the power lies in local decision making. You get local politicians on board and change happens. But which is why I think we always say when we talk about HAFCAC's campaigning, get to politicians, build relationships with politicians, because they are the starting point for change within a local authority or a national government.
It's important to remember that charging was our main campaign issue, but we had two other issues, both that we were successful in campaigning on. So one was the Independent Living Fund closed in 2015, which was a government fund that supported disabled people with significant support needs to stay living in the community and not in institutions. And that fund was really important to disabled people. And in that period of austerity, the government closed the Independent Living Fund and transferred those obligations to local authorities that were subject to already huge austerity cuts. So closing a national fund and then putting that funding cost back onto local authorities, which for me was just disgusting. And then the government transferred some of that money that they used for the Independent Living Fund to local authorities. But it wasn't ring-fenced, so it could be used by local authorities for anything. could be used running parking services or
Potholes.
Exactly. So we campaigned that in Hammersmith and Fulham should be ring fence for social care, social services. And it was. Not only did Steve and councillors agree to ring fence it for 12 months, which is what happened. That was the maximum you would get out of most local authorities. And Hammersmith and Fulham ring fenced it for at least 8 years. So that was a huge victory as well. And also traditionally, so people who get direct payments, that's after their assessment, can be paid the money directly to run and organise their own, employing their own staff or getting their own equipment or using the resources that come after that assessment in the way that promotes each individual's independent living. But people need support to be able to do that. And we had a direct payment support service run by disabled people in the borough for over 30 years. And that was taken in-house by the Conservative council of the time to basically offer very little support. It's not run and controlled by disabled people. So the service was poor, it was shoddy, and it was not delivering the support that disabled people need to manage their own direct payments. And that was a huge loss for us when that service was closed down and taken in-house. So it was another campaign issue for us to get that service back where it belongs and that it's run and delivered by disabled people. So we had 3 aims: the charging, the Independent Living Fund, and the direct payment support service. And all 3 of those campaign issues that we were successful on achieving, and the direct payment support services back with our local disabled people's organisation, Action on Disability. So that's really important. And we decided to close the organisation in 2021 because we'd achieved those 3 aims and COVID had kind of taken its toll on our ability to do things. But watch out for 2025 because it looks like we might be back in a big way given the attacks on disabled people's services coming from national government.
I think let's pause there.